When someone says we can't find ways to pay for these programs, they're just not want to make sure that we help black and brown people. If we focus on the front end of helping people have better schools and better jobs and better housing, then it's less likely that they're going to be interacting with the police on the back end.
I recently went uptown to K&L in the Bronx to whip a little something up in the kitchen and break bread with mayoral candidate Michael Blake while getting to know him and his vision for our city a little better.
For people who are meeting you now for the first time, talk a little bit about your experience and your background.
Born and raised in the Bronx. Family's from Jamaica. I was named after Michael Manley and Alexander Bustamante. That's my full name, Mike Alexander Blake. Manley had the Bushman t-shirt. Born Christmas night here in the Bronx. My mom would always tease me I was going to be one of three things. I was going to be a preacher, a journalist, or a politician. I became all three. I'm an Alpha, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I'm a Rev, I'm a Mason, 100 black man. Public schools K to 12.
Okay.
PS 79, 118, deal with Clinton, went to Northwestern and came back. And life changed forever when I got to be trained by this man named Barack Obama, right? So trained me how to run campaigns. I was with him in 2006 for the SB Camp program. Went to go work on the first campaign. We won. Lessons, I was in Iowa. I was the other black guy in Iowa. I'd always tease about that, And it was an incredible honor. I was with him for 20 months, 8 states. Ran constituent outreach in a bunch of the states. Went to the White House, which still, it's hard to have a greater honor than that if you're in public service. So I worked for him for 2.5 years in the White House. Ran African American outreach, ran minority business outreach. Did the second campaign, and then I came back home. I wanted to take care of my dad before he passed in 2013. Ran for office, got elected in 2014. The powers that be tried to kick me off the ballot 3 times, but we won. And then I was in the assembly for 6 years. I did the My Brothers Keeper program for boys and young men of color. We did prompt pay bill, diversity in medicine, raise the age. Khalif Browder was our constituent. His mom was our constituent. We did the work. Vice chair of the Democratic National Committee for 4 years. When we led, we beat Trump. Just saying, right? So people should probably listen to us when we're talking about what has to happen here. Small business owner now, Atlas Strategy Group, run a democracy effort called the Kairos Democracy Project. Husband, bonus dad. Well, dad, because you still got love for the girls, 16 and 13-year-olds. And just love our people, right? And I just couldn't continue to watch what was happening in the city and sit on the sidelines. I just believe that we deserve better. I think we deserve a new generation of leadership. I think we deserve a new generation of black leadership. And if we're serious about helping people make and keep more money and defeating Trump, I think I can show people that you have another option.
Now you can add chef to your long list of...
Well, I already had that out here.
Excuse
This is just the latest vibe out here.
If there's one thing that New Yorkers can agree on, it's that this city is too damn expensive.
1,000%.
Housing costs, other expenses have far outpaced wages, making it nearly impossible for low-income, working-class New Yorkers to be able to afford to stay in the city.
Yeah.
And on that point, you have an interesting proposal for guaranteed income. I'm sure you remember back in 2021, there was a lot of talk about universal basic income, but this is a little different, a little more targeted, right? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, look, I think you have to find ways to make sure you're helping people make ends meet, and housing and childcare are the 2 main expenses. And so we get there by ending credit scores for rent and homeownership applications, then actually implementing the true cost of living and having a local median income. Because I think if you do all 3 of those, then you actually understand how much is someone supposed to be paying. How do we actually understand what's happening on their block? Because area median income includes Westchester County. That doesn't make much sense. And if you end credit scores being used, then you give people a better chance. Taking that step, then we actually know what's the gap. So how much more do you need to make sure that you're not rent burdened? Because too many New Yorkers, too many Americans are right now trying to figure out, how do I pay my bills when it comes to rent, when it comes to childcare? And so what we said is, let's have a guaranteed income pilot specifically for that gap. Now, we've already supposed to be doing true cost of living, but Eric Adams didn't implement it. We voted on this as New Yorkers, right? And so if we understand those pieces, then someone's like, okay, my credit scores are not blocking me from getting access to a home. I can actually understand that expenses are lower. We can actually understand what's truly my local median income. When we now know that gap, let's fix that gap. And if you give people that kind of funding, then you can change the game. And you'll hear people talking about, well, we can't find the money. Well, they can find the money for everything else, right? And we can pay for this. So I said, let's have a vacant apartment tax so that someone's not living here as their primary residence. Let's actually have a tax on that, and also do a vacant commercial tax for those that are just warehousing buildings right now. We have $2 billion of unclaimed fees and fines. A lot of that is from parking. And then we can actually get more serious about what's going on in the city budget right now. So $1.4 billion in NYPD overtime, that doesn't make sense. It's not about public safety. So when someone says we can't find ways to pay for these programs, they're just not want to make sure that we help black and brown people.
I want to stay on the economic justice piece for a second. You were at a reparations forum last night. I know that there's a state level commission that's working on developing proposals, to recommend. I'm wondering what you're hoping to see from the commission, and what you would do as mayor to make sure that it's implemented in the most impactful way.
Look, when we think about who has been waiting to get the economic help, it's been black folk, right? And we're not just talking about the last few years, we're talking about centuries. And so I've never really understood the strong opposition of closing the gap when it comes to people having money in their pocket now and in the future, right? So the vibe of this is this: how do we think about funding up front through reparations, again, understanding what's that gap around the true cost of living, because if we do that, then we can actually have it be proportional to your local community. But then we also got to break the institutional barriers that have led to racism and discriminatory policies against us. It's also about how are you making sure the redlining on housing, the lack of access when it comes to schools, what we've seen around our hospitals, those policies have to change too, because that's also repair. Right? And when people say, well, how do we do this? We're seeing it in Evanston with First Repair. We're seeing this out in San Francisco. There's no good reason why we're not doing it here. So if we want to change the game for black people, for folks in New York to actually have a chance for real, then you have to change the economic game. And if we understand that at a minimum, 16, 19, 18, 65, people trying to stop at 63, goes beyond that, then Jim Crow, then all the other policies thereafter. You've had centuries where you've been behind economically. Why would we not want to have equity to fix that gap? Lastly, doing that will actually reduce the burden on other city expenses. Because if someone has more money in their pocket and then they're spending it in different causes, then you're not having city agencies having to fill in on the backside. And so, to me, if we're serious about making sure that a kid has a book in a book bag and not being arrested for a dime bag, well, make sure they have money and can get the bag. You do these things, you change the game in a better way. And we've broken down the piece. People will say, well, I'm not sure we can do this. We saw this during COVID. Checks went out to people across the country. Governor Hochul is about to be sending out inflation checks later this year. So now we're done with, we can't figure this out. The question is, you don't want to figure it out for black folks. And in this environment where anti-blackness come out of DC, NYC should be the complete opposite and actually helping people, not hurting people.
So let's talk about housing, another big issue.
Absolutely.
Everyone pretty much agrees that we need to preserve our existing affordable housing stock and also create more. But what's your specific approach to getting us there? And then I also know that you're proposing a new way to calculate how eligibility for affordable housing is determined. So talk to me about that as well.
I'm glad you asked me a housing question when I got that oxygen right there. I think there's a few different pieces around how do we envision what is truly affordable housing. I think we got to have at least 600,000 units that we're building out. We've seen essentially in the tri-state region, about 524,000 has been the number that currently we need to hit the supply and the demand. If we don't have any changes by 2035, it's about like 950,000 they're saying. So to this degree, the way we get there, very specific. I do think we need to have a local median income because AMI to me does not work. It is not giving people the fair chance of what's actually connected to your area in the South Bronx or in Central Brooklyn or Southeast Queens, North Shore Staten Island, what's going on in Manhattan, right? It doesn't make sense to me on how Westchester County then impact is happening here. And then I think we also got to expand on the income thresholds on these applications, because essentially you have to be rich or just getting by and poor enough to qualify for a lot of these housing opportunities, and to me that's just wrong. Right? And so we're not actually helping people in the middle class get a better chance when it comes to housing. And so you're getting blocked out the game on what could be possible. If you don't change these things, you're gonna have more people leaving the city, and you're gonna have more people that are moving around in the city because they're like, I can't afford what's happening in Brooklyn or in the Bronx, and so I'm trying to go to other neighborhoods, and then you have displacement and gentrification that starts happening from there. And so, but that's why I go back to the vibe though. How do we make it easy for more people to even get a chance in the first place? And a lot of that happens by ending credit scores for rent homeownership applications. You do that, you give people a chance to really get in the game when it comes to housing, who too often have been blocked out, not because of their own doing, but because the system has been against them.
I want to ask you about the part of your plan that's raising the threshold for affordability so that more middle income families can have access to affordable housing. How do you determine sort of the amount of units that you're setting aside for low income versus middle income to ensure that people who are closer to the median renter income, which is around 60K, or even people below that, who are severely rent burdened, don't have to be forced to compete for a limited pool?
I think we start from the place of, let's understand what are the percentage of residents in that neighborhood that are actually in that threshold. Right? A lot of times we're doing things backwards. We're essentially saying, well, it's going to be 30% of AMI, or it's going to be 50% of AMI, 60% of them. Like, okay, but let's take a step back. What is this community actually suggesting is the data? So are we in a scenario where 90% of those that are living in this zip code are actually at $60,000, $70,000, $80,000? Okay, then how are we creating and expanding the percentages to be more applicable to that? Because right now we're effectively putting out numbers that are theoretical and are more advantageous to developers who are building as opposed to the residents who live in them. And so if we understand the numbers of how many people are rent burdened, how many people actually want to own a home, which obviously we know numbers much larger than it should be, then I think we should be looking at how do you get to that 50, 60% threshold of a local median income. But again, to your question though, we actually don't know that and can't know that yet until we implement the true cost of living. Because affordability is not just, do I have my home, right? It's my transportation costs, my grocery costs, my expenses around, housing. All these pieces are intertwined in making affordability, right? When you have that final $100 and you're trying to figure out what bill am I paying, your affordability metrics becomes, okay, what's the time to when something's due? But rent and mortgage is coming no matter what. And I just think for us to be able to get serious about making it fair for more people, we have to not only increase the thresholds, but we got to make it easier for people to be able to stay in the home. And too often it's been too easy for people to lose a home and get evicted rather than actually protect them on the front end. One
piece of your housing plan that caught my eye is that you want to set aside a portion of newly built units for native New Yorkers. Now, I don't know how much time you spend on TikTok, hopefully not nearly as much time as I do, but every 3 to 5 business days there's some debate between native New Yorkers and transplants, and some of the transplants feel personally attacked, but the reality is far too many people who were born and are raised in the city are being priced out and pushed out of their neighborhoods. Entire communities displaced to make room for newcomers who have higher incomes. I think about that New York Times piece that came out maybe a year or two ago that talked about this black exodus from New York City. So how would that work? Are there specific targets?
I think we have to get real focused around how many of our New Yorkers are living in the tri-state who want to be living in the city right now, right? And starting there, right? And starting with that understanding of what has been that lost, not just of black New Yorkers, which, the Times story was pretty powerful around that, of who's living in the tri-state but is working in New York City. Because to me, that's the first threshold. Because if you're going back and forth to be working in the city, but then you're living in the tri-state, one would believe that person would actually want to live here if they could afford it. And once we see, again, I think we've seen different data points that have essentially suggested that the demand and supply obviously are aligned. As of now, you're talking about essentially 550,000 units would be needed now to actually meet the demand. 10 years from now, it's essentially about 950,000. So we now know, okay, for us to really get to the metrics of helping our native New Yorkers, those that are born and raised, you know, like I'm a Bronx boy, we got love for Brooklyn, we got love for Brooklyn, I understand, right? It's saying how many of our fellow New Yorkers are living outside of the city, primarily, if not solely, because of housing. Once we calculate that number, that should be that first threshold of how are we actually being serious about building and prioritizing for them. Which one would suspect that would probably be at least 250 to 300,000 of that number I'm suggesting, because we all know somebody that is getting on the train from Jersey, driving out from Long Island. Yeah, look, I know folks that are living in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, who are coming to work every single day. And so since we know that's essentially that number, starting from that place allows us to say, okay, well, what do we got to change? We increase the thresholds in terms of what's happening for your income. We increase the thresholds in terms of how you can apply. And then give people and build more. You can't fix the housing crisis without building more. And so to me, focusing on that number, essentially at 550 right out the gate, where probably about half of that is probably native New Yorkers who are living elsewhere who want to come back in, why would we not have a dedicated strategy around that? I think about it like back in the day, we had Mitchell-Lama 2.0. Okay, well, let's build for the intentionality of working class, middle class, and those that are native New Yorkers who want to stay and come back. Because that's the primary reason why they're leaving. They're not leaving because they don't love the city. They're like, I can't afford this. Right? And in particular, when we look at black folk that are going down to Georgia and North Carolina, or
my family.
Exactly. They're like, I cannot afford this. But if we make it a dedicated allotment at price ranges they can actually afford, then you change the game.
I love Atlanta, but I would like them to stop taking so many of our people. So
absolutely.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about public safety. It feels like the dominant narrative that has defined the public safety debate over the past 5 years has been there are certain people who are willing to sacrifice safety in the pursuit of justice, which to me is not really grounded in reality. Like, people want to be safe. They want to be able to navigate the city without having to look over their shoulder or be worried about not making it home.
Absolutely.
They also want to be able to navigate the city without being targeted for being poor, for being black and brown, or for exercising their First Amendment right or protest. And I'd like to think those two things, safety and justice, can coexist together. So I wonder how you would deliver both of those things, and also would there be any changes to policing or how the NYPD operates under your leadership?
Everybody should go home. Right? Everybody deserves to get home safe. Everybody deserves to be alive. And the notion that somehow we're not prioritizing, that's kind of wild to me, right? And so that does not mean then that we don't have accountability. So I believe we should have mental health professionals addressing the mental health crisis when it comes to public safety. Because we got 1,000 National Guard that are out there. Why don't we have 1,000 mental health professionals actually on our subways and buses? Make sure every officer has on body camera and have it turned on. Right? 'Cause that's critical there. Having increased street patrol, as opposed to anyone that are sitting in the subways and just kind of chilling. Like, no, we need you moving around, especially in these target neighborhoods where there's a high amount of crime that's happening. Where many of the crimes of the top 6 crimes are rooted around robbery, larceny, and stealing. And so, okay, how do you help people make more money in their pocket in the front end so they're not doing that? I think we should also have a registry on police misconduct. On if someone had misconduct before they came here, we need to understand why did they get the job and how they're able to keep the job here, right? To create better trust and better systems. You got to have a change when it comes to community policing in terms of expanding it out and have more focus around violence interruption work, right? We've seen this out in Brooklyn. Brownsville Safety Alliance had a dope example. People calling in for that 1 week where calls were going to violence interrupters as opposed to the 911 for cops to be responding, so that they're able to go talk to the young brothers and young sisters out here, say, hey, what are we doing around this here? And I think a big change is that people want to see real accountability around, like, okay, you have $1.4 billion spent on overtime, but what did that do? So yeah, you have to have more officers that get hired, but more cops doesn't lead to automatically better policing. So it has to be around the systems and the culture. I don't think we need to have stop and frisk come back, right? But we need to have more officers actually walking around And it's also tied to the point of what has to change up in Albany, right? Like addressing repeat offenders around what's happening around discovery and speedy trial. I get that. And you have some officers that are legit saying, well, why would I risk my job, my pension, my benefits for someone that is going to be out tomorrow? Well, okay, let's change the rules so we can hold people accountable for that so that everyone feels safe. Because I don't know anyone that's like, you know what, I want to go outside and I want someone to be messing with me. Nobody wants that. Yes, we got to have, far less guns on the street. Obviously we had the shooting up here in Morrisania recently. 60-year-old lost her life because of a stray bullet. But we have to be real clear that if we focus on the front end of helping people have better schools and better jobs and better housing, then it's less likely that they're going to be interacting with the police on the back end. And for the police, we need for them to, of course, have a greater relationship with us, but they also need to have a mayor that they trust and need to have a mayor that they believe in who actually respects them. And you have right now a former NYPD registered Republican that they don't respect. And so if he couldn't have law and order, then why would he keep the job? Rikers Island going on the federal takeover. If you couldn't control that, then why are you keeping the job? And so, yeah, people can talk about stats being better, but people still don't feel safe. And a lot of that means the change of the culture and what's happening on NYPD. We have a $114 billion budget across the city. It doesn't make sense to me that we are not finding more money to make sure more kids are going to school, graduating school, and having jobs that are dedicated to them. And that goes back to the guaranteed income piece. Why don't we have a better pipeline to connect people to the open jobs in the city? That young brother that's standing on a corner right now, young sister standing on a corner, that might be taking part of, bad decisions, they're a mathematical genius. They just got to be directed in the right path.
Yeah.
And our job has to be showing them what that path is looking like. And if we take those kinds of steps, then people are like, you know what? We see a change here. NYPD, less time on phones, more time out on the street, walking around. That's not shade on them. Just being real about this, that like a lot of times we're in an environment here where people don't feel like we're actually fixing the core problem. And primarily a part of this is mental health. Right? Overdose prevention centers, we need more of those. We need more money in opioid settlement funds. We need to be more focused on the voluntary commitment. We need to take those steps so that then officers can be focused on doing their job of addressing the additional serious crimes that are happening as well.
I heard you say on the Errol Lewis podcast that came out recently that you believe in repurposing some of the NYPD funds.
Absolutely.
So would it be coming from like overtime?
Start with 1.4 billion, right? And overtime that's not around increased public safety. That was effectively a promotion ring that was happening out here. And so being intentional around that. I do think there's several things we can do. I think taking some of those funds, expanding out My Brother's Keeper, My Sister's Keeper, so that you have that presence in all schools. I think every student should have civics, financial literacy, and mental health before they graduate. I think you can have a greater focus on what do we expand out around security deposits, people to get access to buy a home. I do think you need to have a guaranteed income pilot that's helping people around universal child care as it relates to what's going on around housing. Universal child care, not just in the afternoons, but parents need that support on the weekends too, right? You got my mom here, she understands that, she raised 4 boys, right? Like at the end of the day, what are we doing to help people with these expenses here? Put more money towards going on transportation. People are sick and tired of these trains being late, buses being late. Lord knows I understand that. And that means you got to put money into what's going on around improved signals for the trains to actually be faster and on time. We have a 1900 system in 2025. For our buses, we got double parking. It's frustrating. You got potholes. People just want us to fix these things, right? And so to your question, reallocate to address quality of life. Put more money into more mental health professionals. You address that, people feel safer. Put more money into making sure that you have elevators and boilers that are working in our night shift buildings. People feel better. Put more money in to make sure that people can actually get a job, keep a job, they'll feel better. Put more money in for our immigrant brothers and sisters that don't have a lawyer when it comes to these immigration hearings. That's what we can be doing. I go back to, again, help people make and keep more money. Help people lower their expenses. Everything else changes from there. And as opposed to us just trying to lock people up on the back end, as we've seen at Rikers Island, you're spending that amount of money, that didn't make people feel safer. It got to a point where the feds were like, we gotta take this thing over. And so that's the kind of vision I want to have as mayor. I want to be able to show people you can have better, and you deserve to have better. You can have a scenario right now where you can say to these young kids, you know what, I can go to school and graduate from school and there's something lined up for me. I can have funding around building out the next generation of Michelama 2.0, middle class. We can put funding away when Trump cuts things around Medicaid and Medicare and prescription drugs, especially for the seniors and those retirees that are wondering, do I have my money out here? We can do this. And it's not happening because of lack of leadership. You know, you want to change the game, you got to change the mayor.
So let's take a little trip up to Albany, your old stomping grounds, right?
We know a little bit about that place.
To some degree, there's like collaboration that's required between the mayor and the governor to get some things done in New York City. So the mayor will go up to Albany and advocate for funding or for certain priorities. What's on your Albany wish list?
You have to make it a point that we have more control on what's going on at MTA. I mean, we're pretty much deferring to what's going on. We're pretty much deferring to what's going on the state. When people are, people are pissed about the train being late or the bus being late, they're not like, let me go up to Albany and go fix this, right? We have to have more changes when it comes to what's going on around public safety, especially around repeat offenders, right? If someone has been doing the same thing over and over again, and you're not able to make a change around discovery laws, around speedy trial, that doesn't really make much sense. And I was a part of the team that had a lot of these changes initially. I think it went a little too far in us not being attentive of, well, what do you do for the person that keeps doing the same thing? I do think we got to be thoughtful around revenue. Like, we're going to have to bring in more revenue because of the cuts that are coming. And especially when it comes to hospitals, when it comes to what's going on with Medicaid, when it comes to those Medicare as well. So that big bucket list goes back to, though, almost where we started, around housing. How are we changing the laws to make it easier for someone to get and keep a home? What are we doing to change the laws that our transit system is much better than what it is right now? And how do we actually have a curriculum and education that is embracing the moment that we're in? There are a lot of people that are promoting anti-blackness and anti-Latino and anti-Semitic and Islamophobic. We should be like, no, absolutely not. We're going to reject that. And that goes back to what I did with my brother's keeper in the state. You have to be able to work with Albany and say, you know what is the funding structure we're going to put into our schools to ensure that we're not losing who we are? My brother's keeper is happening in schools. You may see it as Young Men's Initiative here in the city, or MSK and My Sister's Keeper. A lot of that comes from the state. So to me, the expansion and the changes there, and then probably lastly for now is like property taxes. Like, you got to change things. Look, I'm a huge Knicks fan, big sports fan, but the fact that Madison Square Garden is not paying any on taxes and we're not getting that revenue is kind of wild to me. Right? People are frustrated every single day around how much they're paying in taxes but not getting that back. A lot of that is going to come from what happens upstate. And so if people start to see practical changes, they're like, okay, I can get down with this. And when folks are asking me, like, okay, all right, Michael Blake, why you? I'm like, I'm the only person who has White House, State House, and local experience.
The big three.
Kind of relevant in this moment right here. And I'm the only person that's been a part of a team that's defeated Donald Trump when I was vice chair of DNC. And so I know how these levels move to actually change the game in a real practical way.
You touched on funding, and I want to circle back to that. Obviously, to see your agenda realized, the city is going to have to invest some money into it. And so if you can speak a little bit more about your plan to fund it, but also another thing that you touched on is the potential, layer of complication of the federal government withholding or cutting funding. So how do you ensure a just budget in the face of, cuts from the feds?
It's one of the reasons I think you need to have a black person in this moment. Because usually when cuts happen, it's black and brown communities get hurt. more times than not, public schools, public education, public transportation, public hospitals, public housing, they get cut when other cuts happen. And I think it's important for folks to be able to say, great to have a wonderful idea, but how do you pay for this in the face of what's coming, right? And so I said, let's figure this out. Let's talk through the money that needs to be reallocated in a much more thoughtful way within the budget. NYPD is just one example, but we know in each of the agencies, there's excessive spending that is happening that is helping people keep a job as opposed to actually helping New Yorkers right now. What are we doing around a vacant apartment tax? How do we have a vacant commercial tax? How do we be very thoughtful around the unclaimed fees and fines? People don't realize it's about $2 billion we're talking about of, a lot of that parking tickets that could be massive revenue to bring back in. But I also think, if you help small businesses to stay open and they see that public safety is getting better, it will make it more likely for higher funding when it comes to tourism and more people coming in, and more small businesses say, you know what, I could come back and not gonna have these vacant opportunities. You do all of these steps, I pretty much laid out a game plan right there. That's about $4 to $5 billion right there, regardless of what's coming out of DC. And the other dynamic of this is then we got to win back the house, right? Which we can't separate these pieces. We have an environment where for the next year plus, we're wondering, can we make it? Because we have a racist, sexist, demagogue buffoon in the White House, right? And the expenses are going to go up on us if we're not showing people how we make that. Now, part of that also goes back to Albany, no question. Albany is going to have to be serious as well in terms of revenue generation and what changes happen around taxes for a very small number of people. I think it's really hard for us to tell our New Yorkers, hey, you're gonna pay more, but you don't see better quality. That doesn't make much sense to most people. So what I'm laying out is, how do we bring in more revenue from these other outlets? There's essentially about 18 industries that are driving a lot of the growth in the city. A lot of it also coming in, particularly around healthcare. But you have other pieces right now that we should be focusing on, like what are we doing around technology? How do you get more around semiconductors? How are we being more thoughtful around tourism, sports and entertainment, gaming, right? What you're doing, social media right here. Like, there's lanes here that we're not actually focusing on, that if we make it more attractive for more people to come back into the city, we're gonna bring in more revenue. How do we actually get more people to come back into the city? We give people actual affordable housing. We help people when it comes to their child care if they have a child. And we actually give them a better quality of life so they feel like, okay, what I'm paying for makes sense to me. You do that, you're gonna increase your sales tax revenue. You do that, you have more money in the coffers. We talk about this in our family, right? Like, you got too many cats that are genuinely trying to figure out how they're gonna make it, right? My family, we came from Jamaica. I was 1 or 2 born here. Mama became homeless since in Jamaica. We sold dinners to pay rent, Crescent and Burnside. A lot of times, we're not making it easy for people. And I think if we make it easier for more people will come back. More people coming back, our revenue goes up. Not in the hundreds of thousands, we're talking about the millions and billions. Why would we not want to do that to help our people? That's how we pay our bills.
Well, you invoked the racist, sexist demagogue in the White House. To close out this portion of our conversation before we go into the little lightning round, we've seen this aggressive escalation of ICE activity, which is a complete overstep and overreach.
Oh.
Anything you would do to strengthen safeguards and protections for New Yorkers?
Think about the restaurant we're in right now, right? Like, ICE is not just impacting the Latino community. ICE impacts all of our communities. We're all, son of immigrants, whether it be Jamaica, whether it be African, whether it be Caribbean, whether it be Asian, we're all in this together. And so ICE has no business in our schools, our community centers, our places of worship. Full stop. Only should be permitted in if there's a signed judicial warrant, not because Eric Adams doesn't want to upset Donald Trump. How do we give language access and protections to our entities that are at these buildings so they know don't let someone price in? How do we hire out more lawyers so to have, I know you want to eat, don't stop eating because I'm taking questions. You got that good, see the immigrant throwing down out here. You understand the assignment right now? It's that vibe of, you got 180,000, immigrants that are right now going to hearings without legal representation. Like, these are the pieces that are real. And so simultaneously, how are we helping understand and acclimate someone when they're coming from another country here? The nonprofits got to get reimbursed fast and get paid faster, full stop, right? It's also the appreciation of like, all right, now, I mean, it pisses me off. That's why I'm stopping, right? Like, I'm really thinking about this. Like, you think about like those nonprofits that will take care of the kids out in Brooklyn, right? Nuestros Niños, Grand Street, right? Like, they were helping immigrant kids, immigrant families, and the city wasn't going to pay them because the city was wrong on the attendance rates, not them. What are we saying to our immigrant families? But we're saying at the same time, you're going to let ICE at Rikers? What the fuck do you need ICE at Rikers for?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just not who we are as a people. And yeah, I am a reverend who cusses. I know that kind of surprised y'all right there, but like, but it's like, we're better than this. Mm-hmm. We're better than this. And people, I think, real talk, I think people fundamentally want to know, how are you helping me with affordability, paying my bills, and how are you checking Trump? And people are scared. They scared, they're wondering, do I leave my house? Because an ICE vehicle might roll up on me.
Yeah.
Right? You know, I had an educator tell me earlier this week that they know of 2 different instances of an ICE vehicle waiting until the kids were dropped off the school bus. They were trailing the bus, waiting till the kids went in, until they saw the parents on their own, and then moved in. So then what happens to that kid when they come outside later in the day? Right? All these pieces are inhumane. Mm-hmm. And for anyone who was like, well, these immigrants are taking our jobs, taking our money. Let me be real clear. It was a $114 billion budget before the migrant influx was happening. Mm-hmm. So don't let MAGA Republican points confuse you, right? Venezuela being the largest presence that's been happening, let's embrace our brothers and sisters. It's overwhelming. We'll talk about women, families, men, children that are trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So what are the steps? Help someone when they get here actually get acclimated, making sure that the nonprofits actually can give them the support that they need around not just language access and job readiness and educational settings and family engagement to help that family. Make sure that you are blocking ICE from our facilities, making sure that we say very clearly, we need to stay as a sanctuary city. You're doing that so you're not turning over data to the feds unnecessarily and allowing the feds just to ram shot what's happening here. Those are the types of things that have to happen, real talk, right? And if we're not serious about this, we will go into a scenario where a whitening of New York City, and I want to make it real clear, my white brothers and sisters, I'm not hating on y'all. This is a mindset that's coming out of Trump.
Yes, please.
Of you all don't belong here. Oh, bless up, man. Respect, man. That's the immigrant vibe.
Community, family.
1000%. I'm named after Jamaican politicians. My full name is Michael Alexander Blake. I'm named after Michael Manley and Alexander Bustamante. How are we gonna be out here talking about we're not helping our immigrants?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. So we're good eating oxtail curry, going all the different things. We're good with our immigrant brothers and sisters helping us at our schools. We're good in all these different ways. But somehow, no, you got to go. Because we've allowed a Republican messaging to exist of you're not safe because of them. Stop. Stop. Right? I was telling some folks recently, we were doing a conversation at a church, and I said, Jesus was a Jewish man of color, a refugee in a foreign land, where in the Bible the main topic that was discussed was poverty. And if you read, and my birthday's Christmas Day, shout out Mama, I see you right here, right there, right? And when you read about Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and the manger, and it's going to rock with me on the immigration point here. Mm-hmm. More times than not, people misread that verse. They read it to say that there was no vacancy and there was no room. Mm-hmm. But it actually never didn't say that. It said there was no room for them. Mm. There was clearly space there. Mm-hmm. The innkeeper was like, you people, you poor brown people, you people I don't want here. Same kind of narrative. I don't want these kind of people around. because somehow they're not good for us. But they're good for you to take care of your kids and to clean your hospitals and clean your floors and do it. They're good for all those things, but you don't want them around. No. And that's why I go back to, if you want someone that understands DC's ramification on what happens here in the city and is connected to the block, right? I do think you need to have a mayor who actually has an energy about what's going on in our communities. I don't know about like sitting around smoking hookah as the other one's doing all the time, but I think like you gotta have someone who's out here, and no judgment on no shade on hookah, but you understand what I'm trying to say. It's just wild right there, but it's like New York City is not New York City without our immigrants.
Well, let's lighten things up for a second. Get to know Michael Blake a little better.
Okay, no pressure.
Michael Blake, the Reverend / former Assembly member / former DNC. We didn't even get to touch on that.
All these Jamaican titles out here.
Okay, I know you're a big sports guy. Give me your biggest New York City sports hot take.
May 16th, 2025 truly might be one of the biggest New York sports days ever. Right. You have the Knicks, the chance to close out our rival Celtics on home court. And then you have the Yankees hosting the Mets and Juan Soto coming back. I mean, come on, man. I mean, that's just crazy right there. Like, it's just a beautiful thing. You know, I'm a Jets fan. One of these days, God is going to give us an opportunity to go to the playoffs again. Look, you know, honestly, I think there's just crazy dope energy about Jalen Brunson. Like Jalen, I mean, this cat made a decision to take less money to support the team, and now the Knicks are here. I mean, man, Jalen. If Jalen was running for mayor, I mean, I would probably rank him second.
I'm not a sports person, so I don't know how hot that take was. I'll leave it to the comments to tell me how hot that take was. And last question for you. What is something surprising about you that be?
I think I'm surprised folks learn I had a quiet wedding, because, you know, I try to protect the fam out here, but, you know, amazing Jamaican Honduran woman, you know, black love out here, you know, right?
I love to see it.
All day. I miss playing the piano. I need to get back to that.
Okay.
I really.
How long has it been?
Oh, years. I still know the scales. It will take me forever to get back in the game, but I miss that immensely. I love comedy clubs. I love bowling. Now, you know, people wouldn't know those things.
So you do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we try to have a little Renaissance vibe out here. You know, give a little bit of everything, no doubt.
Well, Michael Blake, thanks so much for chatting with me.
Oh, no, you're a blessing right now.